Now we are going to switch to the English mode. We are going to have this masterclass about Château Musar. Château Musar is housed in a castle in 18th century castle, founded in 1930 by Gaston Hochar. He was inspired by the Lebanon's 6,100 winemaking tradition. The vines are located in the Bhakas Valley. It's almost 1,000 meters above the sea level. Since the 50s, they have organic vineyards. The wines are produced with a non-interventionist winemaking philosophy. They are well known all around the world by the finesse, the elegance, the extraordinary ability to age for the wines. Well, Serge Hochar was awarded by the Decanter in 1984 as the first ever Man of the Year chosen by the Decanter. Well, after this short introduction of the winery, I will pass the word to our president, Matías Precioso. He's going to introduce Pierre and Marc. They are going to be speaking after him.
Thanks, Bautista, and good afternoon to everybody, or good night, depending on the place. For today's masterclass, we have two luxury personalities. As moderator or presenter, we have Per Holm. Per is president at the German Sommelier Association and also director of bylaws and coordinator of PR, communication and marketing at ASA, at the Associación de la Sommeliería Internacional. So thank you, Per. He's a close friend of all the sommeliers in Argentina. And also we have as the main speaker, Marc Hochar. Marc is the third generation member of the Hochar family running Château Musar. He was involved with the family, with the winery in 2010, and together with Ralph and his brother Gaston, they continue the legacy of their grandfather in making these great fine wines. So thank you both for being here with all of us, and let's start with the talk.
Yes, a wonderful good evening, or hello, buenos dias, buenos, solamente buenas tardes para Marc y me. Sorry, my Spanish is not really too good, but I will make a very short start because I would love to take you with us from where you are right now to where we are going to. So that is why I'm sharing my screen. The Legend of Lebanon. So we are starting here in Argentina at the Asociación Argentina de Sommeliers con el presidente muy amable, Matías Precioso. And from there, we will do a very short, very quick tour to Lebanon. So you see, flying can be quite easy right now. And here we are. This is Lebanon, just next to the Mediterranean. It's a country in Western Asia, and I will switch on the 3D so you can follow a little bit where it is. It is bordered by Syria to the north and east, and Israel to the south, while Cyprus is west across the Mediterranean Sea. Lebanon's location at the crossroad of the Mediterranean basin and the Arabian hinterland had contributed to its rich history, shaped the cultural identity of religious and ethnic diversity. So Lebanon is really something very, very special. The earliest evidence of civilization in Lebanon dates back more than 7,000 years, predating record history. Lebanon was home to the Phoenicians, a maritime culture that flourished for almost 3,000 years before Christ, long before Christ. The region came under the rule of the Roman Empire and eventually became one of its leading centers of the Christianity. As the Arab Muslims conquered the region, the Maronites held onto their religion and identity. However, a new religious group, the Druze, established themselves in Mount Lebanon as well, generating a religious divide that has lasted for centuries. During the Crusades, the Maronites re-established contact with the Roman Catholic Church and asserted their communion with Rome. Lebanon was conquered by the Ottomans in the 16th century, so we're making quite a jump now, and remained under their rule for the next about 400 years. Following the empire's collapse after World War I, the 5 provinces constituting modern Lebanon came under the French mandate. The French expanded the borders of Mount Lebanon Governorate, which was predominantly Maronite and Druze, to include more Muslims. Upon independence in 1943, Lebanon established a unique confederalist form of government with a major religion set appropriated with the political powers. Lebanon initially enjoyed political and economic stability, which shattered by the bloody Lebanese Civil War 1975 to 1990 between various political and sectarian factions. The war partially led to military occupations by Syria from 1975 to 2005 and Israel 1985 to 2000. Despite its small size, Lebanese culture is renowned both in the Arab world and globally, powered by its large and influential diaspora. Prior to the civil war, the country enjoyed a diversified economy that included tourism, agriculture, commerce, and banking. Its financial power and stability through the 1950s and 1960s earned Lebanon the moniker of Switzerland of the East, while its capital, Beirut, attracted so many tourists that it was known as the Paris of Middle East. Since the end of the war, there have been extensive efforts to revive the economy and rebuild national infrastructure, while still recovering from the political and economic effects of the conflict. Lebanon remains a cosmopolitan and relatively developed country with the highest human development index and GDP per capita in the Arab world outside the oil-rich economies of the Persian Gulf. Capital of Lebanon is Beirut with some 360,000 people only, but there are 2.2 million people in the metropolitan area of Beirut. The total population of Lebanon is 6.8 million people. The religions are divided 61% Muslim, 34% Christian, and 5% Druze, more or less. Now let's make a jump to the Bekaa Valley. The Bekaa Valley is home to Lebanon's famous vineyards and wineries. Winemaking is a tradition that goes back 6,000 years in Lebanon. The Bekaa Valley, even if it sounds weird that it's a valley because it's very high, is a fertile valley in the eastern Lebanon. It is Lebanon's most important farming region. Industry also flourishes in Bekaa, especially that related to agriculture. The Bekaa is located 30 kilometers east of Beirut, so you can see Beirut here, and the Bekaa Valley is here. So these are only 30 kilometers, more or less, but there is a small mountain in between. The valley is situated between Mount Lebanon on this side, between Beirut and the Bekaa Valley, and the Anti-Lebanon on the other side. You see this in this small map even better. You have the Lebanon mountains and the Anti-Lebanon mountains on the other side. Bekaa Valley is 120 kilometers long and about 16 kilometers wide on average. It has a Mediterranean climate of wet, often snowy winters and dry, warm summers. The region receives limited rainfall, particularly particularly in the north, because Mount Lebanon creates a rain shadow that blocks precipitation coming from the sea. The northern section has an average annual rainfall of only 230 millimeters compared to 610 millimeters in the Central Valley. From the 1st century before Christ, when the region was part of the Roman Empire, the Bhakas Valley served as a source of grain for the Roman provinces of the Levant. Today, the valley makes up to 40% of Lebanon's arable land. The northern end of the valley, with its scarce rainfall and less fertile soils, is used primarily as grazing land for pastoral nomads. Farther south, more fertile soils support crops as wheat, maize, cotton, and vegetables, with vineyards, orchards centered on Saleh, the city of Saleh. The valley also produces hashish and cultivates opium poppies, which are exported as part of illegal drugs trade. Since 1957, the Litani hydroelectrical project, a series of canals and dams located at Lake Karo at the southern end of the valley, has improved irrigation for the farms of Bhakas Valley. And now let's make a jump to one of the most renowned temples of the area, which is called the Temple of Bajos. So the god of wine, the Temple of Bajos, we have here, is part of the big Baalbek temple complex located in this valley. The temple complex is considered an outstanding archaeological and artistic site of imperial Roman architecture and was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984. The Temple of Bajos is one of the best preserved and grandest Roman temple ruins in the world. Its age is unknown, but its fine ornamentation can be dated to the 2nd century before Christ. The temple was probably commissioned by Roman emperors Antonius Pius. No information is clear what's recorded about the site until the 4th century Greek conquest. When the complex fell into despair, the Temple of Bajos was possibly protected by the rubble of the rest of the site's ruins. It was only until the late 1890s, beginning of 1900s, that a German expedition excavated 2 of the large temples and began reconstructions on the site. In 1920, the state of Greater Lebanon was proclaimed and protections and repairs of the site mandated by the Lebanese government. So here we see this big part of the temple area, the ruins. I was there more or less 2 years ago, and it was very, very interesting to see all these signs of wine growing and of Bajos. And from there, it's not a big jump to come to the place where we want to go for today, to Château Musar. Château Musar, you can see, is located on the Mediterranean side of Mount Lebanon, facing the Mediterranean. So I will stop this presentation now so we can discuss more easily with you. Mark, we have seen that the location of Musar Winery slide. Are the vineyards also on the Mediterranean side of Mount Lebanon, or are they located somewhere else?
Yes. Hello, Per. Thank you for this presentation. It's very informative, very formal also. Now we'll make it a little bit less formal, but it's good to have the background. So thank you for putting all these details. Let me pull up a picture, because that actually will really help understand what I have lost it. Okay, let me find it again. Sorry. Wow, there it is, and I'll share it. once it opens. Okay. Right, I'm getting there. Well, hopefully you can see this one. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay. So, as you described Lebanon, there's, I'll annotate here. So, Beirut is here. The Bekaa Valley is here. Hopefully people can see. I'll put it a bit thicker. And the vineyards actually are located in the Bekaa Valley, whereas the winery is here. This is where Château Musar is located. And so the reason it's done like that, when my grandfather started the winery, he knew that Lebanon was a new country. Lebanon, as you said, was born as a country with its current borders, was born in 1920 at the end of the Ottoman Empire. And my grandfather started the winery in 1930. And as you pointed out, it was 5 different areas of Lebanon, or different areas that would put together into the country of Lebanon, that included different religions, different communities. And when my grandfather started the winery, he decided that it would make sense to plant the vineyards in the Bekaa Valley, which is the breadbasket of Lebanon, which is where most of the agriculture happens, and had also a historical wine growing presence. But the winery itself, he decided to put it in Byblos here, which is not in Byblos, in Razir, next to Byblos and Jounier, because first he needed space. He had access to the cellars of the old castle of the Musar that was owned by his cousin. And my grandfather started the business with basically nothing. And so it made sense for him to use that space to start building the cellar, the vats in the cellars of the castle. But also he was more comfortable having the cellars located in the heart of the Christian heartland, because he wasn't sure whether the country would survive, since it was a country that was relatively young at the time. It was barely 10 years old as a country. And so this is why we have a distance of roughly 30, 40 kilometers, maybe, well, no, actually 60 kilometers, because you actually have to go up from the vineyards in the Bekaa Valley, up the mountains, then go down towards the coastline. Wait, let me just put let's say a blue. So you would start here, you would drive up the mountains, then down towards Beirut, and then travel to the winery. And this is roughly a 3-hour truck drive to get the grapes from the vineyards to the winery. And I usually get the question as to how do we transport all of this, and I did, voila, I'll show you this. Can you see? Voila. So the question is, how do we transport our grapes? This is maybe not a typical way of doing it, but this is the way it's always been done at Musar. So we basically have very big trucks that can carry anywhere from a few tons up to 12, maybe sometimes even 15 tons of grapes. They're all picked in the morning in the Bekaa Valley, then put together without any crates, without any, I guess, protection or refrigeration. But this is the way we've always done it. And then they're driven for a couple of hours until they get to the winery. I usually tell people, you know, if you're studying enology today at the wine school, and you tell your teacher that you're going to effectively put all of your grapes into a big truck of you know, several tons, and then drive them for 3 hours in the sun, you probably would not get your diploma. But at Musar, this is how we do it. It's been the case for many, I mean, for basically 90 years. It has some issues because sometimes the roads were closed, but in terms of the wines themselves, they are probably impacted in some way by this transport method that we have, but not in a negative way. And so we've kept it, and this is probably part of the identity or part of the signature that comes with Musar, this trip.
I have seen in the picture you showed as first that you have different sites for the red wines, or for the red vineyards and the white vineyards. What is the reason for that?
Yes, so let me go back to the picture. Voila. So here, yes, so it's basically, we're talking about obviously different varietals, and they necessitate very different types of soils, and also so you can find them here, and we're actually planting some over here. And these white varietals are probably varietals that have existed for thousands of years. When you talked about the Phoenicians producing wines, they were probably producing more whites than reds, as far as we understand. And they were probably using Obeid and Merwah, which are the varietals that we use, because they existed at the time. And historically, they've been also higher up in the mountains. So they're not only at 1,000 meters or 900 meters of altitude, like the Bhakas Valley and the other reds. They tend to be a little bit higher, even, in terms of altitude.
This is a very nice point. The bottom of the Bhakas Valley is about something like 800, 900 meters high. So having this in mind, a valley where you think, okay, this is deep down, it's already very high. So the mountains on the right and the left, so Mount Lebanon and the Anti-Lebanon, the vineyards are really on high sides.
Yes, let me show you. I don't know if I can share this one. Can you see this one?
No, for the moment.
Okay, okay. Well, let me reopen it.
And the
okay. Always tricky sometimes with this.
the Lebanon, or the Mount Lebanon itself, is already roughly how high is it up there?
Voila. Now you can see it now.
Yes.
Okay. So voila. Here you can see the Bhakas Valley. So the green part and the I guess brown soil part here. This is the Bhakas Valley floor. This is 900 meters of altitude already. And you can see then the mountains going up. This one actually is the Mount Lebanon part. So this is the middle of the country. And Syria would be behind you. If you were looking at this picture, Syria would be behind you. And so you can see, yes, that the mountains goes up quite high. This is not the highest point. Actually, if you go more to the north is in this direction. So to the right of the picture, you get to a point which is even higher than this one. But what you can see is that it's fairly green. It's not a desert. Actually, Lebanon is extremely green. We have a lot of water, obviously a lot of snow. We even have skiing in Lebanon because these mountains go up to 2.8. The highest point is 3,000 meters. And so we have a skiing season that can be anywhere from a month to 3 or 4 months long, depending on the year. The other thing you can see is that it's obviously it's very green, and there's a lot of, I guess, reddish, brownish soil here. You actually have a river going through the middle of the Bhakas Valley, 2 rivers. So the closer you are to the river, the more water you'll have, the more clay you will get. But the base of the Bhakas Valley floor is limestone, on which there's roughly 1 meter, 1.5 meters of a mix of clay and limestone. And the further you go away from the center of the valley and closer to the edges, so closer to the foothills of the mountains, obviously the less clay you will have, the less water, and the more limestone. And actually, for vineyards that are for vitis vinifera, so for vineyards for wine production, it's better to be closer to the foothills of the mountains. This is why our vineyards are located, in our case, you know, not in the center of the Beka, but more on the edges, whether it's the whites or the reds, and where you have a clay and limestone.
Oh, that's incredible. Valley floor at 900 meters and then mountain going up to 3,000 meters. I remember flying into Lebanon, into Beirut, going by car or by a small bus over the mountain to Saleh. And the road, it was a good road in the end, but it was a serpentine going up and down. And the way of driving is a bit different to what we are used in Munich or Cologne or in Central Europe. It's a challenge. I was happy that I didn't have to drive.
Yes, that's part of the culture in Lebanon. People drive they drive well, but actually I think we only started having red lights, if I remember well, around 10 years ago. Before that, I don't think we've ever had red lights.
Yeah, but
markings on the streets. That's now part of what we need to adapt to. But it's for somebody coming from Europe, yeah, it's probably challenging. In Argentina, it's probably more common, I guess.
Might be, yes. But as you said, they drive quite safely, and I was there for almost a week, and I only saw one accident, and that was in the city. So that can happen everywhere in any city. But it's really, yeah, sometimes it's good to have a driver.
Yeah.
Coming back to the wine, you were talking about grape varietals of the whites like Obeidi, and so can you talk a little bit more about these varietals? I think most of us have never heard before about.
Yeah. Yes. So we use two local varietals to produce our Château Musar white, and actually that's the bottle that you're drinking. Voilà. Yes. I have here a bottle of.
I'm enjoying 2003
Voilà.
Château Musar Blanc.
Yeah.
So just imagine a 17-year-old dry white wine, and it is mind-blowing.
Yes, so you can see that the color is darker. Actually, the one I have here is 2009. It's a little bit lighter than yours in terms of color because the wines get a little bit darker as they age. But so the two varietals that we use were already planted and existed, as vineyards when my grandfather started the winery in 1930. So he decided not to plant any whites. He didn't need any whites or additional white varietals, and he started using those. There are varietals that are, I guess, very peculiar. They ripen very late. Usually we are in the northern hemisphere, so we would harvest like Europe or France, Italy, Germany, etc. So anywhere from August up to September, October. Typically the reds are harvested around September, basically end of August and September. But these two varietals, Obeid and Marwah, tend to take a lot of time to ripen. We actually have another white wine that is called the Musar Jeune white, which is our entry-level white, where we have Chardonnay, Viognier, and Vermentino that go into the blend. And these three imported varietals are harvested roughly beginning to mid-August. And they are planted in the Beka Valley, and they will typically get to alcohol levels of 13. If you wait another 5 days or 10 days up till mid-August or more, you're at 15 degrees alcohol. So very quickly the sugars go up, and so obviously we need to harvest them fairly early. This is Chardonnay, Viognier, Vermentino. We then harvest the reds until usually mid-September, and then we harvest Obeide and Marwah, the local white varietals, And so they've spent roughly 1.5 to 2 months more in the sun compared to, let's say, Chardonnay. Chardonnay in August was at 14. Obeide and Merwah in October are at 12 degrees alcohol only. Why? Life. Yeah, it's probably because they are local varietals, so they are adapted to the terroir. They know how to deal with the heat and with the sun. What it means mostly is that these varietals, because of this long aging process on the cluster, on the vine, it leads to maybe not a lot of sugar, but a lot of complexity and phenolic phenolics that get built in through this maturation process. And so you end up with a wine that is very rich, as you said earlier when you were talking before the call, very intense. When you taste it, you expect something to be extremely high in alcohol, because it seems like it's extremely rich on the palate, but it's actually not. And so it's a very lean but intense wine. And and the way we produce it is, after we harvest in October, we ferment just the juice, so there's no skin contact. That's fermented in wood, in barrels of 300 bottles, so French barrique, French oak. It stays in there on the leases for anywhere from 6 to 9 months. It really depends on every varietal and every barrel. It depends also which plot of land it's coming from. Once we feel that there's enough weight on the wine and the leases are starting to have an impact, then we effectively end up blending Obeide and Merwah, and that's blended roughly after 9 months, and we bottle after 1 year. But these varietals create wines that are relatively austere when they are young, or maybe it's the way we produce them, but that's our experience. And so we then leave these bottles in our cellars for anywhere from 6 to 8, sometimes 9 years before we release them. So now, for example, we're going to start releasing the 2012 white. So 8 years after production. This is how long these wines need to start to open up. I know that in Germany, everybody's used to drinking wines, extremely young, very crisp and fresh. Obviously, the Rieslings can age a lot, but the culture now and the tendency is to go to crispier, fresher, younger wines, which is absolutely, I guess, maybe the opposite of what this Château Musar white style of wine is.
This is exactly why I love this style, because I'm not a big fan of this German culture or German habit to drink these babies, because a great wine cannot be great after a year. It needs time, like this wine has had. And especially if we think of young wines, they are normally much more fruit driven. And then if you just think about our profession, about food pairings, in which food combinations do you have fruity elements? Okay, if you're going to a fruit salad, you find quite some, but generally we're not talking about fruit flavors in the meal. So I think these flavors of aged white wines are far better for matching with great food. And especially if they show this structure of being strong, but also having this lightness, so that after the first bottle you ask for the second one.
Yes. And they also develop a lot of complexity. Mm-hmm. When we describe our wines, whether it's the reds or the whites, actually, if you think of the wine or a wine as a living, I don't know how to call it, but living, not being, because it's not a being, but a living product or living, liquid, it means it actually has the ability to change. It changes over time in a bottle. It also changes in the glass, as it gets exposed to oxygen. And the beauty about, I guess, these varietals is that they have an ability to age which is amazing, and that you can see the evolution of the wines, and as the wines get older, just the level of complexity builds up. Typically when these white wines are, we launch them, let's say at year 8 or 9, you have a bit more exotic fruit. The wines change a lot in the glass, so the wine after an hour is completely different. Usually after an hour you get to a lot of floral notes, jasmine, rose petals, maybe orange blossom type of aromas. If you wait and instead of opening your bottle at year 10 and open it at year 15, you're not anymore into these maybe exotic fruit and orange blossom type of aromas, but you're much more into, let's say, walnuts, honey, maybe earth components. And if you wait another 10 or 20 years, you know, if you open a bottle of 75 white, which I opened a couple of weeks ago, in that white you will get exposure, or you will get hints of sherry, maybe Madeira, maybe you will get a hint of you know, something which is almost like a whiskey. And it depends, you know, on a bottle of 75 white, when you taste that. So if you drink it over 3-4 hours, it will go through all the different phases. And that's what's surprising about these wines, is this ability to evolve so much in the glass and build this complexity, and, you know, touch on many things that you would not necessarily expect from a white wine.
Yeah, in the end, this is what is happening with me right now, because I opened this bottle already at 6:30 my time. So now it has more than 1.5 hours being open, almost, no, more than 2 hours. And it's getting better and better, and especially having it in a bigger glass like I do have it now. And as you also recommend on the label, serving temperature of 15 degrees. I like this very much, because if you cool down the white wines too much, you lose taste.
Yes, yes. I agree. You have to think of these white wines like a red wine in terms of its ability to age, the way it develops until it becomes wine, in terms of aging also on the cluster, on the vine. It's not necessarily a wine that you will want to drink cold next to the pool, but it's a wine that you can drink and enjoy around the chimney, you know, next to your chimney when it's cold, because it behaves like a red wine. And so we decant it, we age it, we serve it at cellar temperature, 15 degrees Celsius, and you can effectively drink it and have an experience which is more similar to what you would expect from a red.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is your white wine philosophy. With the reds, you're going a total different way, with more French varietals, and this. How does this strong connection to France come from? Their being in part of Lebanon for such a long time?
Yeah. So going back to, I guess, the history that you mentioned, obviously there's been a large community of Christians, in particular Maronites, but there's actually, I think, 11 different Christian religions present in Lebanon, because it's, you know, the Middle East is the birthplace of Christianity, amongst other things, but obviously also other religions. So they're all represented in Lebanon. And the French were actually helping during the Ottoman Empire, were helping the Christians also maybe not defend themselves, but basically make sure that they were not overrun too much by the Ottomans. The Ottomans as rulers were fairly open about religion, but sometimes there were some rulers that were a little bit more strict. And so there's always been a strong connection between the Christians in Lebanon and France, and I guess eventually the Pope, or the Vatican, in a sense, of, because eventually the Maronites, which are the Christians, or the largest Christian community in Lebanon, recognize the authority of the Pope. Now, when my grandfather started the winery, because we also speak French in Lebanon, we speak Arabic, but we also speak French and English, and French has a huge impact because of the historical items that I've mentioned. My grandfather went to study actually medicine in France, didn't like it too much, but when he came back, he decided to start the winery, and the French army was posted in Lebanon and in the Levant area after World War I, and they needed wines. And so it made sense for him to produce wines because of the language and the connection with France using French varietals. We had phylloxera in Lebanon in the early 1900s, and so there were no red varietals that he could use that were local, at least not that we found, or that he found at the time, and I don't think there are any now. So he had to plant varietals, and for that he went to France because that was the most obvious thing to do when you were speaking French. Now his choice of which varietals to use was interesting. He went for varietals that resist to heat, mainly. So Cinsault, Carignan, we have Syrah, we have Grenache. But he was also friends with Ronald Barton from Château Léoville-Barton, who was posted in Lebanon, who was I don't know which grade he had in the army, but he was there after World War I. And I think maybe that is the reason why there was also Cabernet Sauvignon that was included in the lineup of the varietals that were planted, because probably because of that influence of a Bordeaux grower being also there. And actually my uncle, is called Ronald, basically because of the friendship that my grandfather had with Ronald Barton.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's always a very strong connection between France and your family, but also within the family. As far as I understood, your parents or the generation before, there were also two brothers taking care of the company. Now it's again you, your brother, and
my cousin.
And a cousin, yes.
Correct.
So this seems to be the teamwork which is traditional for Musar.
Traditional, I don't know, but it's. I mean, obviously we have traditions, we have values, we have a way of thinking that was passed down from my grandfather, then to my father and my uncle, and then to us, and then we hope to continue with the next generation. We don't know. We'll see. You know, I only joined the family business 10 years ago. I was in my late 30s. So you don't know what life plans for you. So we will see. But the idea is that there's a philosophy, there's an approach that we have as a family of sticking together, and and so this is what we're continuing. Even though, I'm living abroad, my cousin is also living abroad, and my brother's based in Beirut. So we share the burden. There's a lot of traveling involved, or there was before we got hit by this pandemic. And so it makes sense actually to have also some of us outside to travel, because we sell our wines in 70 countries. So there's a lot of traveling involved.
For sure, and being based in Central Europe, it's far easier to travel than always going back to Lebanon. Coming back to the red, okay, so it's a cuvée of Cinsault, Grenache, Syrah, Cabernet, and do you do the same way as with white? So you first grow the varietals one by one in the barrels, and then you blend them after a year, or what is the way of doing it?
Okay, so here there's maybe several things to mention. So we have 3 wines, 3 labels. We have what I call Musar Jeune White, red or rosé. So it's the Musar Jeune range. I'll actually see if I have a picture. Okay, no, I don't have it here, but I'll get it later. Wait, let me open it. To explain. Okay, so share screen. Voilà. So this is our Musar Jeune range. So you have the white, red, and rosé. This is actually a new label. The label was a little bit different before. This was released since last year as a new label. We then have, so this is the entry level. We then have another wine called Hochar Père-et-Fils, which is a single vineyard area, which is only available in red. And then we have, lastly, if I still have it, I don't have it anymore. It's bizarre how they disappear, these pictures. And then I'll find, voilà, for example, this one. Voilà, Château Musar red. We also have a white and a rosé. So we have these three levels of wines. They are all blends, but they're not exactly the same blend. When we build our wines, we always think of the balance and the harmony that we can bring to the wine. So we're looking at using a few varietals so that the balance of the wine is there. One varietal sometimes makes sense on its own. Pinot Noir, for example, is a varietal. Wait, let's change the light a bit. Oops. Pinot Noir is a varietal that does very well on its own. But in Lebanon and at Musar, we believe that blending the varietals that we have that work for our terroir, like Cinsault, Cabernet, Carignan, and Grenache, etc., are better as blends. And so we will always use Cabernet in the three wines that we have, the three reds, because Cabernet allows to really have the structure of the wine. It's effectively the skeleton of the wine. But it tends to be maybe a little bit too tannic, a little bit too powerful, a little bit too rich. And it also is a wine that a varietal that, as a wine, needs much more time to develop into more secondary and tertiary aromas, which we look for. So we need the Cabernet, but we tend to take this very masculine varietal and offset it or complement it with another varietal that tends to be very feminine, elegant, refined, and that tends to also age well, but in a very different manner, where it moves on to more secondary and tertiary aromas much more quickly. And that other part of the spectrum is Cinsault. So in the Musar Jeune, the Hochar Père-et-Fils, and the Château Red, we'll always have Cabernet and Cinsault. And then we add a third varietal in the middle of the blend, and that third varietal changes depending on the label. So in our Musar Jeune entry level, the third varietal will be Syrah. In Hochar Père-et-Fils, the third varietal is Grenache. And in Château Musar, which is our top label, the third varietal is Carignan. And so they're a little bit different blends that give an identity that is unique. And so the way we produce these wines is that we don't do what is called a field blend, where you blend everything at the beginning. For us, it's important to wait. It's important to wait enough time to understand the characteristics of the year, to understand how every varietal behaves in a certain year, how every plot of land that we've kept separate in terms of its juice, separate from the others, behaves. And it's only after 1 year or 2 years that we would start doing these blends, because by then we know better. We have more information about each wine. And then when we're looking to get this balance right, this harmony of the wine right, if you do it at 2 weeks of age, you know, I don't know if you have children, but I think you have children, if I remember well. But yes, and so do you know when you look at your baby at 2 months or 2 weeks old, you know, is he going to be as tall as you, blue eyes, brown eyes? You have no information, you have no clue. And it's the same for wine, in our opinion. At year 2, the wine already has developed enough characteristics to understand, you know, how each vat of, let's say, Cabernet, or each vat of Cinsault, or each vat of one specific area in the Bhakas, or of Carignan, how they each behave. And then we can put them together and create this blend that works well. So this is the process that we follow at Musar.
So the blend also depends very much on the different year.
Yeah, so the blends tend to be approximately the same, and I say approximately because they're not, but they are roughly You know, this is the Middle East. Huh? I mean, there's no. This is art. This is a part of art versus science. Huh? We're not necessarily looking in the Chateau Red to create exactly a percentage, the same percentage every year, because that doesn't mean anything. What's more relevant is the balance of the wine. How does that year? How do the different vats blend in together to create the balance of your wine? Sorry, that's food coming from my daughter. And so, yes, perfect. Yeah, and so it's important to get that balance right. And in Chateau Red, it's 1/3 Cabernet, 1/3 Carignan, 1/3 Cinsault. This is what we say. On average, probably this is what we have. Is it exactly that percentage every year? No, it's not. But again, it's almost irrelevant, because suppose there's a year where we have a bit less juice of Cabernet Sauvignon, but that year ripening of Cabernet was very, very good, as in a long, hot summer, not too hot, otherwise Cabernet doesn't really stand too much heat, but a long ripening that, let's say, goes until the end of September. So you end up with maybe a Cabernet that is extremely rich and intense that year. Even if it's only 30% rather than 33%, that year probably it will be a blend where the dominant features of the wine will be Cabernet, even if it's 30% rather than 33%, which is our, let's say, our average production. So it's not, again, it's linked to the intensity of a certain varietal in a certain year. This is what determines, you know, how that vintage will go and what will appear as the wines get older, you know, which dominance of which varietal sometimes takes over.
Yeah. And with the oak in the reds, you are also rather carefully, you don't use too much new oak, or does it only appear to me like that because I normally rather drink the elder Musar reds?
Yeah, so I think for this, to understand how we use oak and what type of oak we use, you have to understand the philosophy that we have. Our philosophy, you know, and Juan mentioned it at the beginning, is what we call non-interventionist. What does that mean? It means that we effectively do not want to add anything to the wines. We want the wines to represent what the juice is and when it comes from the vineyard. So we will have basically no treatment at all. So we have natural fermentation. We have no fining, no filtering of the reds. We don't add anything. There's no technology that's involved in what we do. We add a bit of sulfur because now our wines are available in 70 countries, so we need to make sure that they can travel well. But even the amount of sulfur we add is below the organic levels, thresholds. So we have this approach of creating wines that are raw, as close as possible to nature. And if you have that philosophy, it's the same in the way you use wood, because we don't want any influence of wood in terms of adding taste. Wood is there to help the wines develop a little bit of micro-oxygenation for a period of, let's say, 1 year, which is the period where we have our red wines in wood, so that the wines effectively get accustomed to maybe having a little bit of exposure to air, which is what will happen when they get in the bottle and there's a bit of air in that bottle. So it's a kind of vaccination, if you want to call it that. And so we will only add or use 10% new wood every year for our reds. So over a cycle of, let's say, 10 years, we would have replaced all of our barrels. And that's because we don't want to give any flavor of vanilla or any other component that would come from the wood that would distract and take, you know, and add something in terms of flavor to our wines.
Wow, incredible. I see that, for example, Paz is with us, and Pass is or was competing in so many competitions. Having this in mind, to blind taste Château Musar is probably quite difficult. Okay, you will find it because it's something very special. But then going to a vintage, I think you cannot say, okay, this could be a Musar red in the 80s, because the vintages normally are quite different. So you just have to be very well in drinking or tasting every vintage of Musar on daily basis almost.
It's a good point. I've never had that question. Yes, it's comparing the vintages. With Musar there is a signature. There's always a signature where if you've tasted enough vintages of Musar, you will identify that it's a Musar.
Mm-hmm.
Then determining which age it has is completely almost impossible. Now, let's first talk about the characteristic, or what I think is the signature of Musar. It's difficult to describe, obviously, if you don't have a glass in front of you, but I'll describe it maybe in a way a sommelier described it to me, a US sommelier. And he told me, if I'm doing a blind tasting of a red, and I'm a little bit confused because I can feel a component of Cabernet. So I can get a sense that maybe it is Bordeaux, but it doesn't taste like Bordeaux, but there is something from Bordeaux. And then when he tastes it, he finds features on the palate that are more Rhône, probably because the contribution of our Cinsault and Carignan or south of France. But then when he has in the wines the elegance, and here I'm talking about the reds, wines that are elegant, that obviously that are intense, that are rich, but they are not heavy on the palate. On the contrary, they, especially if you go to older vintages, they're extremely confusing because they have the elegance that you could almost associate to a Burgundy. And so he told me, if you're lost between 3 zones in France, then he tells me, I know it's Musar. I don't know which vintage, but I know it's Musar because it has a bit of all these features. Now, the question of the vintages and identifying the vintages is very difficult. I did a tasting with, I think, 15 sommeliers 2 years ago in Florida. We had 12 different vintages going from the, I think 2009 was the oldest at the time, going back to 1964. So it was blind. Usually I don't do them blind, but this one was done as a blind tasting. And the only question I asked them is, okay, take your tasting notes, we'll discuss them, but give me a decade. For every wine, you have to determine what is the decade of that wine, of that vintage that you think. And a lot of them got it wrong, and they were all people who knew Musar, because you can identify maybe the vintage or the age of the wine when it's 10 years, maybe up to 15, maybe 20 years. But from 20 to 40 or 50, it's almost impossible. And the reason it's difficult is because the wines reach this tertiary aromas and keep a lot of vibrancy and livelihood, so that stays. And so between a 20 and a 30-year-old wine, you probably will not see a difference. But also it depends on the dominance of a particular varietal. A vintage that is more Cabernet dominant, because the Cabernet ripened very well that year, will tend to have features of the Cabernet longer, and Cabernet in particular stays younger longer. Yeah? Whereas a Cinsault dominant vintage will start to show a bit more tertiary aromas or earthy aromas earlier. So if I pour you 2 vintages, like 98 and 99 vintage, for example, that are very close to each other, only 1 year difference. 98 is more Cinsault dominant. 99 is more Cabernet, but 99 will appear maybe 5 years younger than 98. If I pour you 2001, which is more Cinsault, let's say, or classical vintage of Musar, it will appear older than 99. So this is where the impact of the blending and the dominance of a certain varietals takes precedence. And so yes, you are, if you don't know exactly or haven't tasted that specific vintage, it's very difficult. You will get lost with Musar, but that's good. It's not the bad thing. I think it's a very good thing.
Yeah, it's a great thing. I remember being at Musar with your brother and going through the cellar, and at a certain point he said, okay, it's time now to open another bottle, and he just grabbed a bottle and we didn't see what it was, and he poured the wine, and I was just like, whoa, what is this? And he asked, okay, which vintage, what decade it could be, but don't answer yet. Just let's walk through the cellar, and then let's walk upstairs to let the wine breathe a little bit. And the wine developed, and it's really incredible to see these aromas developing in the glass. And yeah, it was not the youngest wine, and it showed again the great hospitality of your family.
Did you get?
There is a very nice question coming in regarding if you have visited Argentinian vineyards, probably because there is this similarity between the height of vineyards in Lebanon and vineyards in Argentina.
Yes, actually, I did many years ago. I think 10 or more than 10 years ago. But I cannot remember actually, I was in Salta, in the area of Salta, visiting a friend who was from there. I cannot remember actually which winery we visited, but it was a very interesting experience. Obviously, the altitude, as you say, is similar to what we have. I think, yes, I think it seemed to me a little bit more desertic, so maybe a little bit less water that we would have typically in Lebanon, in that area, yes, so it created wines that were interesting. But the way I think Argentina works, Argentina is closer to Americas, and so a lot of the wines that you would tend to taste would be closer to the style of what I would say what call New World wines. Although you have some wineries that are also in Argentina creating wines more the Old World style, that I know quite well, actually, that I enjoy quite a bit. So it's good to see a country obviously as wide as Argentina that has this whole variety of styles.
I remember when I was in Argentina for the World Championship in 2016, probably it was, or 17? No, 16 it was for sure. Yep. I was struck by all these nets on top of the vineyards because of the problems with the hail. Do you also have hail problems in Lebanon or in Beka Valley?
No, I don't have wood, so I'm touching my head. This is how we do it here in Lebanon. No, we don't have hail, or no, it's not a problem that we have. We have a lot of problems to deal with, but they're very different compared to what you would expect from a typical winery. Obviously, we've had war. We have our trip from the Beka Valley to the winery that has an impact. We're lucky in the sense that the terroir allows us almost to have organic vineyards by default, because this is what we're blessed with in terms of the land that we have. So we don't have that many pests, but we are experiencing more and more issues linked to global warming. So usually in the Beka Valley in the summer, you get to 32, maybe 35 degrees Celsius. And at night it cools down because of the altitude. So a little bit like in Argentina. But now we experiencing heat waves where, let's say, from whether it can be end of July, middle of August, we're not at 35 or 32 Celsius, but we go up to 40. And at 40, even 42, the vines shut down. So we have to harvest early. So that's one of the consequences that we're having. The other consequence, for example, is that we're exposed to frost. we've had frost in 2015 vintage. In May, we had -10 degrees Celsius for 3 days. Now, in the middle of the winter, we're barely at -10. And now to have it in May, after we had already some buds out, it was a very difficult year. So obviously we lost a large part of the crop. And so global warming affects us with extreme weather patterns, not only heat, not only cold, more heat usually, but also cold. And so that's the biggest issue we have to deal with.
I think the next question is very well in this context also. The question is if you water the vineyards.
Yes. So yes, the answer is no. For this, actually, let me, I'll go to a picture because I think it will help to understand. Let me find one that actually shows you the vineyards. Share screen. Voilà. So this is the Bhakas Valley. So what can you see here? Obviously a man working. You can see that these are bush vines. They're actually quite high. They go up to 1.5 meters once they're fully grown. The soil is clay and limestone. It's dry. It's not. We're not talking about trellises. So the way we protect the vines or the grapes from the sun is through the canopy. So by basically having bush vines, and we don't irrigate at all. Because we have snow usually in the winter, or at least a lot of rain up to the summer. The summer has no rain usually, almost none, which is great. But we have enough water before that digs into the ground and stays into the ground. And therefore the vines then have to struggle and get the water on their own. And so this allows us to create wines that are obviously more rich, more intense, because the vines have struggled, they have just enough water. But this is what creates the concentration in the juice eventually.
Yeah, great, thank you. And there is another very interesting question. If you're working with some program in the vineyards for climate change.
It's a good question. In theory, we could work a program of climate change. No, the only thing we try to do, if we can, is to gain altitude. So basically find land which would be higher. If it's higher, it's likely to resist a little bit better to weather. But that's the only thing we've tried to do. Where because of our approach of being non-interventionist, obviously our vineyards are organic. Have been actually organic for probably 50 years, even before organic existed as a word. We've had them certified in 2005 when the vineyard certification started to be possible. But we don't do anything else to manage climate change. There's not much we can do, to be honest. When you get hit by a heat wave, you just have to harvest. I know that there's a debate between organic and biodynamic. Can we go biodynamic? I think biodynamic forces you to harvest at a specific time based on, I think, the cycles of the moon, if my understanding is correct. And this would not really work for us, because if you're hit by 42 Celsius for 3 days and basically your clusters start to rot, you have to harvest. If you don't harvest, you lose everything. So it means that, you know, in a year like 2013, for example, we had 2 or I think even 3 teams at one point working together to harvest, because all of a sudden everything was ripe at the same time.
Oh, that's quite some work. And still sticking to the vineyards, do you use any trailing systems or only bush vines?
It's only bush vines.
Only bush vines. Okay.
Only bush vines, yes. And they're fairly the I'll show you a picture actually. Sorry, let me just find it. the pattern is fairly wide because we don't use any water. Obviously, when we're planting, yes, there is water. For 2 to 3 years, you need to
For the young vines,
so that it grows. These are actually our vineyards, and this is the mountain on the side. This is actually the Mount Lebanon. So the sea is towards the right here. Syria is towards our left, and you can see actually they're fairly wide because there is a bit of water, but not too much because we don't irrigate. Obviously, you need enough space. Otherwise, you end up by having not enough water for all the vines to survive, and then so some of them would die. So this is it's wide enough. Obviously, everything is hand harvested. There are no machines involved. There are machines involved at the beginning in the tractor just to clear the space, but then it's all hand picked, and worked by hand.
okay. And do you do any thinning or green harvest or?
Thinning, pruning, you mean?
No, the question was any thinning.
Thinning.
So probably taking out parts of the vine, the grape. Yeah.
No. So when we prune at the beginning, we try to determine how many clusters we will get per vine. But I don't think, well, maybe we do it, but I don't know the words exact thinning. So I've never heard of it. So maybe probably we don't do it. But our yes,
yeah,
maybe I don't know actually specifically the answer to that question.
Bunch thinning. So I'm not an analog myself, but probably it's.
No, bunch thinning. No, I don't think we don't go and cut specifically the bunch itself. If we were to cut at the level of the la tige, so the branch before, but not on the cluster itself. And when we harvest, actually, when you look at the truck, we take everything. There's no sorting of any kind that happens. There's a sorting, and when you look at the clusters, when you pick them, maybe you will do a first round, so we'll pick what is ripe. Then we need to do a second round to pick what was not ripe the first time, but needed to wait, let's say, another week or 10 days. Then we will do that way. But once the cluster has been picked, all of it goes into the wines. There's no sorting table or anything. For us, it's the vintage. Even in years 2010 vintage, for example, we had a heat wave. We had to harvest early. The clusters, the part in the sun was burnt, overripe. The middle was proper ripening. The part in the shade was a bit green, And so the question is, what do you do? Probably a lot of winemakers would decide, okay, I'm going to take the good part. I'm going to get rid of the overripe and the underripe. At Musar, if you again think of our approach, the philosophy, no intervention, it's the year. I want all of my vintages to be different and to reflect and to really represent that vintage. I don't want to read harvest notes to know what the weather was like. I want to taste it really in the wine. And so in a year like 2010, we take everything. We take the overripe, normal ripeness, underripe. In the end, it adds maybe a bit more sweetness for the overripe part, acidity for the underripe. It's maybe not homogeneous like you would normally have, but it's the vintage. For me, what's more important is to keep the identity of that vintage. And this is everything that we do at Musar permeates or originates from this philosophy of being non-interventionist.
Great. Having heard all this work in the vineyards, the next question is obvious. How many hectares do you work with?
A lot. A lot. Yes. So I think the important question is how many hectares, how much do we produce, and I guess the important is the relationship between production versus land. So we harvest on 180 hectares. We're actually increasing it now to 200 plus even, but we only produce 600,000 bottles. So our average yield is 25 hectoliters per hectare. And that applies to, if I'm talking about the reds, for example, to all of our red wines, whether it's the Musar Jeune, the Hochar Père-Fils, or the Château. So it's not that our entry-level wine will have a bigger yield, or that the Château will have a lower yield. All of the juice has the same yield. The decision to put a certain varietal or a certain vat in a certain label is based on blending decisions, on quality of and harmony of the wines together. It's not based on the quality of one younger juice is maybe less mature, because when you're building the balance and the complexity of the Château Musar red, to get complexity, you need diversity. Diversity can come from the varietals that you use, the different terroirs, because it's spread out, you know, in many areas of the Bekaa Valley, but it's also age of vines. That also adds another component in terms of diversification. And this is what you want at Musar. So I can't remember the beginning of the question, but I think I answered it. But
yeah, the age, the surface of vineyards you're working with.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So the surface is 180 to 200, and what's important is the yields that are low. Actually, for our Château Musar white, the yields are even lower because the oldest vines of Obeid and Miroir existed already when my grandfather started the winery. So we're talking, you know, before the 1930s. So we're talking vines that are more than 100 years old. Obviously, we're planting now more and more because we have to replace or make, you know, because some of these are being lost. And the yields on these very old whites are 10 hectoliters per hectare. This is the white that you're drinking now, actually.
I'm drinking and I'm enjoying sip by sip. Yeah, it's incredible. And I think you just answered the question coming in, how old are the vines? You have very, very old vines, but you also have to replant, so you have young vines. So there's no clear saying, okay, they are 35 years old in average.
Yeah, it's exactly. It will be an average. The average of the reds will be probably between 25 and 30. On the whites, it's a bit more difficult because we produce less and we have planted a lot more of the youngs, but they're also very, very old. So the average maybe is less relevant. But for the reds, it goes up to 60 years of age, between 5 and 60 years of age. And the average at 25, 30 is probably the right and a good, a relevant number.
Yeah. And going to a totally different question, but I think this is a very interesting question also. From a cultural perspective, could you tell us what is it like producing and selling wine in a Catholic and Muslim country? Is there wine culture in Lebanon, or wine, is it tolerated and strongly regulated as it is in Dubai or the United Arab Emirates?
Yeah, it's a good question. Lebanon is a mixture of different religions, of different cultures, and it's a free country in a sense that freedom is part of the important aspects of what has driven Lebanon since the beginning. So you can find all the extremes in the country, you know, in terms of either religions or wealth or views or cultural aspect. Everything is represented. And so you have areas, and the culture of wine has existed for, you know, thousands of years since the Phoenicians. Now it's when the Ottoman Empire was there was a drop in wine production and sales, but the Christians were still producing a little bit, but not really selling it like it used to be done at the time of the Phoenicians. Now wine has come back quite a bit. And so it's part of the culture of going out, of dining, of having food and wine. The other spirit that you have is arak also, which is produced from grape juice, or which becomes wine, then distilled eventually a third time or fourth time with anise seeds that gives this anise flavoring. So it's a bit like ouzo or pastis.
But much better.
Sorry?
But much better.
But yeah, more elegant, more refined, because we're using, you know, not ethanol, but you know, alcohol that comes from grapes, etc. But so as a result, what is it to be in Lebanon? There's always been all these different types of alcohols that are there, not maybe in large quantities, but they're there. Now, some regions are a little bit becoming more conservative than others. But if you go in the Beirut area, you know, yes, you will be surprised at how much people actually enjoy every type of spirit and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. And yeah, we're heading to the final run. A question also to understand the wines, probably. Approximate price of the wines, which is probably extremely difficult because seeing prices in a global scale.
The price where and for what type of wine. I can maybe refer to prices in let's say in Europe or in let's say Germany, which is where I live. That would be probably an example, but I don't know if it applies in the US. It would tend to be always more expensive. In Europe, our entry-level wines, Musar Jeune, white, red, rosé, will be, let's say, 15, 17 euro range. The Hochar Père-Fils would probably be between 20 and 25. And the Chateau current vintage would be probably around 32, 35, 36. It depends where you find it. But what's more relevant than for the Chateau, our top label, is that we release our wines after 7 years for the reds, but we don't sell everything in the first year. And historically, we haven't done so at all. So what it means is that we've built up a library of old vintages that we release over time. So today, the beauty, if you came at the winery at Musar, is that if you want to buy a bottle that's 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, you can find it. If we've produced it, we typically would still have it. Do we still sell as many as before of these older vintages? No, because we have less. But in most cases, they are available. And so the price then goes up based on age and availability. If we're running out of stock, we produce 200,000 bottles of Château Musar Red. You know, if our stocks drop, then prices will go up because we want to make sure that we reduce, you know, that the wines are not available all the time, but, you know, so an increase in price allows us to secure the stock and make sure that in 30 years from now, I would still have that bottle available for sale. But what it means is also for those who are looking, again, for a bottle of 61, a 64, a 59, 70, if you come at the winery, you can buy it. And so that's quite unique.
I think this is a perfect word for the end to say we all have to jump to the plane, fly to Beirut and visit the winery.
Yeah, it would be a pleasure actually. Argentina is a bit far, I know, but you know, it would be a pleasure actually to receive you at the winery. Whenever people want to come, obviously we're available online, and so if you want to reach me, also I'm on through our website. You can reach all of us. There's maybe I'll mention one thing because for those who want to read about Château Musar, we've actually just issued a book that was done by a publishing house in the UK with the Stephen Spurrier that you might know, and so it's you know, it's a bit of reading if you want more to know more on Château Musar. It's available on our website, and then we will ship it.
Okay, thank you both for letting us with the photos and maps and the topics to travel in mind to Bekaa Valley and to Musar. Marc, thank you. We hope to see you in Argentina sometime. And Per, by far, if you return to Argentina sometime, not only with Riesling from Austin, but also with that white Musar. So, thank you both. Gracias a todos los socios por haber participado, a todos los que se sumaron, y nos vemos la próxima. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
All of you.
Thank you, Per. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Matthias, Juan, and Monica for this great hospitality, and looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible in the near future live.
Yes.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.